Today's episode is brought to you by Craftsy. Whether you're new to making or looking to advance skills in a favorite hobby, Craftsy is the place to learn. With over 1,500 classes, there's something for everyone, from knitting and sewing to baking and cooking, gardening, embroidery, quilting, and more. Visit CraftsyOffers.com today and get a full year of Craftsy Premium membership for just $3. That's 97% off the regular price. Start turning ideas into projects you can be proud of. Thank you so much, Craftsy. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 222 of the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals where you can strengthen your creative business, stay up to date on industry news, and build connections within our supportive trade association. Check it out at craftindustryalliance.org. Today on the show, we are talking about owning and running a local yarn shop with my guest, Ana Campos. Ana is a Brazilian knitting instructor, fiber witch, and designer with over 20 years of knitting experience. She currently makes her home by the sea in Salem, Massachusetts, known as the Witch City. As a Latina and an immigrant, she values the opportunities for connection, community, and common ground that knitting creates. Ana's love for the knitting community led her to open Circle of Stitches, the witchiest yarn shop, in 2015. Her focus is on empowering knitters to grow their skills and technical knowledge so everyone can make pieces they love. Ana is passionate about teaching students how to customize patterns for the perfect fit. She also loves teaching Portuguese knitting, which reminds her of her grandma Tina back home in Rio, and hosting her monthly tarot study group. Ana Campos, welcome.
Thank you so much, Abby. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So we talked in the intro about Circle of Stitches, and I wondered if you could kind of describe the shop and what you carry and kind of, in your own words, sort of what the goal is of your local yarn shop.
So how to describe my shop? So I opened Circle of Stitches. It's been 7 years now, which is amazing. I can't believe it's been that long. And it's gone through, sort of an evolution to become what it is today. But I think that the best way to sort of explain what my shop is to talk about the name, Circle of Stitches, because it's a play on Circle of Witches. We're here in Salem. And in reality, everything that I do is an excuse for people to gather and share in community. I think that as a society as a whole, we've lost a lot of really important social things that we used to do, like have sacred circles where women would gather and share, and you'd have opportunity for people of different generations to share stories and be in the same space with each other and just pause and share in that community. And we don't have opportunities for that a lot anymore. And knitting is an activity that really brings together people from so many different backgrounds and across generations. And I absolutely love knitting and I love the fiber arts, but being able to have that community aspect and create a little bit of that sort of circle that we've been missing is what's really, really important to me. And so that has allowed me to sort of bring together things that people hadn't really brought together before in the knitting world. You mentioned in the introduction that I host my monthly tarot circle. And so my shop is a combination of, a regular knitting store, but also a witch shop in a way. We sell a lot of, tarot decks and candles and items for meditation. But it's because for me, I really think that all of this work is very sacred and there's a lot of opportunity for mindfulness and wellness in the knitting. And so I really think that those things belong together. So you'll find, everything that you'll find in any other local yarn shop as far as tons of yarn and knitting notions. I do try and specialize in companies that are smaller and that have morals that I can align with socially, environmentally. So we carry things like spin cycle yarns and wool. And I work with Lube Fiber Studio that works with a micro mill in Pennsylvania, and I work with independent bag makers and all sorts of artists, and so that's very, very important to me. And then, we have the witchy side that I already talked a little bit about, but even there, I try and collaborate with artists and makers. We carry a lot of independently published tarot decks. The candles that we sell are made by a local candle maker in Beverly. And so it's very much focused on community connection, both through our products as well as, direct with our customers.
And can you describe a little bit about Salem? Because Salem is a very unique town. And you do, as you said, a really good job of integrating some of the reasons why people visit Salem into a yarn shop, which I think is a really interesting thing to do. And although there's no other town like Salem, Massachusetts, there are other towns that are known for certain things. And it's interesting to think about how a local yarn shop or a local quilt shop or whatever, kind of craft store is located in that town can also be a focus for whatever it is that town is known for.
Yeah, well, so Salem, Salem is the witch city. And it's an interesting town because it was where the witch trials happened, right? And so there's a lot of very, very heavy, sad history linked to Salem. But what happened is that it's become a place where people sort of come to be witches and be around witches. It's kind of become, a place that embraces that which was, rejected so long ago. Salem is actually a place that has a non-discrimination ordinance written into law, which I think is really amazing. And so it's created a really thriving, very, very unique community. But it's become the place where people come to experience real witches. Laurie Cabot was sort of the first one who put Salem on the map way back when. She opened the first witch store in the U.S. back when witchcraft was still illegal. And over the last 30 years or so, the witchcraft tourism in Salem has really boomed. And so people come here to buy witchcraft supplies and get tarot readings. And it's definitely a very unique town.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have made your shop not just a yarn shop and not just a place for community, but also a place to find witchy goods so that if you are a tourist, you can get all of those things.
Right. And, I honestly was very hesitant in the beginning to do that because there is a little bit of tension, I would say, between, the witches of Salem and the folks who aren't into that stuff. And so there's a little bit of a division. There's people who kind of look down on, the witches and the witchcraft shops. But realistically, I have been reading tarot longer than I've been knitting. I started studying tarot when I was 8 years old because I grew up with an aunt who's a tarot reader. And I started knitting, around age 9 and sort of on and off. And so both of those things have been a huge part of my life. And so when I first opened, I was like, no, I have to be normal. I can't let people know that I'm a weirdo, right? And so I just opened an air quotes regular yarn shop. And then I realized, why did I leave a corporate job to work for myself to still feel like I can't be authentic? And so I just decided to start bringing those things in little by little. And now tarot and witchiness is very popular in the knitting world.
Right. So it's caught up in a way. Yeah, because Salem's also like a Massachusetts seaside town.
Yes.
And so it has another sort of identity beyond the tourist
Absolutely.
piece.
There is the side of it where it is a historic seaside town. We have the Peabody Essex Museum, which is one of the best art museums in the U.S.
That's my favorite.
We have a very, very rich maritime history. There was a time when Salem was a more important port than Boston,
Right. Absolutely.
So it has a very, very rich history.
So let's talk a little bit about where you grew up because you said that you learned to read tarot when you were a child and learned to knit. So you grew up in Brazil, is that right?
So I was born in Brazil and I've lived a bunch of my life in Brazil, but I've moved around a fair amount too. I lived for a few years in Uruguay, which is just south of Brazil. And I lived in Germany for a few years, and I was born in Brazil, but my parents were actually stationed for work in Tokyo, Japan at the time. So 3 months old, we went back to Japan and I was there for my first 3 years.
So what did your parents do for work?
Both my parents used to work for the Brazilian Foreign Service.
Oh, wow. That's so neat. Okay. And so you said that you learned to knit when you were a child. Who taught you?
Well, so the funny thing is that my mom taught me how to knit when I was 8, but my mom doesn't really know how to knit. And so I'm not entirely sure what she taught me, but I was convinced that I was knitting. And I recently found the swatch that I made when I was 8, and I was like, I don't know what this is. It's definitely not knitting. And so it was a thing that I sort of learned over and over in my life from different people. And when it really finally stuck, honestly, I was 18, and I learned from a good friend of mine who I had actually met through paganism. And so that was another sort of point in my life where like witchiness and knitting intersected.
And did you go to college in the US?
I did. That's how I ended up moving here. I graduated high school when I was 18, and I moved to Connecticut to go to college.
Did you go to Connecticut College or?
I did, yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So my husband grew up in New London, so I've been by there many times.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Small world.
Yeah, totally. Okay. And so what did you focus on in college, and what did you think you wanted to do as a profession?
I double majored in architecture and psychology, and I wanted to be an architect. When I finished college, Connecticut College, I moved to Boston to go to graduate school. I went to the Boston Architectural College, and I worked full time and took graduate classes at night. And it was very grueling. And then I graduated, and I was already working in the industry because I worked the entire time I was in grad school. And then I worked for a couple more years, and I was not very happy. And I was spending all my free time knitting to de-stress. So I started selling my hand knit pieces at craft fairs. And then I realized I don't actually know how to sell fashion. Like, I don't know anything about that. And I realized I'm actually passionate about the knitting side. So then I started designing knitting patterns and hand dyeing my own yarn and selling it at craft fairs, on weekends.
Okay. So knitting at that time was a hobby, sort of fledgling business in a way.
Yeah.
And it sounds like writing the instructions and making the materials was more attractive than selling the finished pieces. And so did you at a certain point decide, okay, I need to switch careers?
Yes. So I don't know when I decided that that was my goal, but at the point when I started doing craft fairs, I was doing that with the intent of eventually being able to work for myself and being able to leave the architecture career. Honestly, just was not working for me in terms of like work-life balance. Not that I have any now, but at least like now it's my own fault as opposed to it being for someone else. And honestly, there was a lot of sexism in the industry that was really difficult. And so I knew that I wanted to be able to create a life for myself that was, safer and happier. And so when I was working the craft fairs on weekends, I definitely had that goal of trying to grow my business. I never planned to open a yarn store as what that would look like. I didn't know that that's where I was going to go. But the year that I turned 30, I left architecture.
Okay. And was that scary? How did your family feel about that?
Well, my husband at the time and I definitely had some back and forths about it, but ultimately he supported me. My mom to this day is a little unsure of that choice. She has at least stopped sending me job listings as of a couple years ago, but she was definitely very worried about her daughter, working for herself because it sounds unstable, but it was actually Tara Swiger. If you know her, she's
do. She's
coach.
Been on this show. Yeah.
Yeah. So she said something to me, and this was years ago at this point, probably more than a decade ago, but she said, your business hasn't failed until the moment that you give up on it. And I was like, oh, okay. That kind of gave me a little bit of peace.
Yeah, that's true. So, what was the business at that time? Was it the patterns and hand dyeing yarn or?
Yeah, when I was chatting with Tara, it was actually, I was hand dyeing yarn, and it was before I opened my shop, but sort of in that transitional moment.
And were there some shops that you had been to either locally or when you travel that just inspired you, or you felt like, wow, this is a really great business, or this is a really great shop and I'd like to do something similar?
So Gather here in Cambridge, which is where you and I met,
Yes.
obviously was an inspiration as far as the potential for community. Salem used to have a yarn shop called Seed Stitch, which used to be very special, and I actually worked there and managed it for a while before the owner decided that she was, done with that part of her life. And so I was able to be in that environment and, see how wonderful it could be, but then also make the decision of, what would it be like if it was mine and how would it be different?
Right. So what were some of the things that you learned during your time working at Seed Stitch? That's interesting that you had that kind of on the job experience and training, specific to what you're doing now.
So what I realized while I was working there is that people kept coming back to see me specifically because of my technical knowledge. And so that's been something that I've really leaned very heavily into. Honestly, my architecture background has been really helpful for that, because I actually, for my final master's thesis, you had to include a non-architecture section, and I wrote a whole section on the structure of knitting. I'm able to look at knitting and really understand the structure of it. Like if I forgot to add a cable, I can drop just those stitches and put in the cable. I've dropped and picked up brioche, and it's because I really understand the structure of what's happening there. And so I approach teaching people from that perspective. Honestly, one of my least favorite things that exists out there is that Kitchener stitch rhyme. I hate it. I hate it because if you're not starting exactly where that rhyme wants you to start, if you're off by half a stitch, it doesn't work. And so I teach people to understand the structure of it instead. And so that for me has been really important. Just really empowering people to really understand how their knitting works.
Right. The why behind the choices that you're making.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So, did a retail space become open and you thought, maybe now's the time to jump and make this happen? Or how did the shop come to be?
Well, so the person who owned Seed Stitch sort of surprised all of us by saying that she was moving on. And I sort of had to think about what am I going to do now? Because having left my corporate job, having a part-time job at her yarn shop was something that made me feel like I had a little bit of stability, right? And then it went back to what Tara said. She said, as long as you're working for someone else, you can lose that job at any time. Your business is only done when you decide it's done. And so I sort of had to figure out what are my next steps, but also I really enjoyed the yarn shop environment. And I was driving around Salem one day and I saw an open storefront and I was like, And so I called the landlord and bought a lot of paint because the walls were magenta. And, here we are. It felt kind of very sudden, but also very right. And I was fortunate that when I was in graduate school for architecture, one of the classes that I had to take was on professional development and how to write a business plan. And so I looked at my very limited budget and I wrote a business plan and I said, all right, I have a 3-month cushion and then I need the shop to be making enough money to pay rent. And I hope this works.
I want to take a minute now to talk about our sponsor, Craftsy, and here is a message from Craftsy. At Craftsy, we know making. Whether you're new to the handmade life or looking to advance your skills, we have classes for all maker levels and interests. From knitting and sewing to quilting and embroidery, cooking, baking, paper crafts, and more, Craftsy's instructors guide and encourage you, empowering you to turn ideas into realities. And they have an exclusive offer for Craft Industry Alliance podcast listeners. Right now, you can get a whole year of their premium membership for only $3. Visit CraftsyOffers.com to sign up, and the discount will be automatically applied at checkout. For only $3, you get a full year of access to over 1,500 premium full-length classes. It can be challenging to know where to go to learn new things, especially when you are an absolute beginner. Craftsy instructors help build strong foundations as they teach, setting you up for success and helping you fix mistakes as you go. Their enthusiasm and strong teaching style make learning accessible to all. If you are an experience maker and looking for new challenges and fresh projects, Craftsy is for you too. From perfecting your fondant skills to tackling complex stitches, from eye-catching garden design to next steps in sourdough, Craftsy has advanced classes in all crafts from instructors who are experts in their field. With over 1,500 classes, including downloadable patterns and recipes, Craftsy has a class and a craft for everyone. So visit craftsyOffers.com today and get a year of Craftsy premium membership for just $3. That's 97% off the regular price. Start turning ideas into projects you can be proud of. Get this exclusive offer at craftsyOffers.com. Thank you so much, Craftsy. And now back to my conversation with Anna. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. All right. So you just kind of jumped in and started, I guess, like buying inventory. What were you looking for at the time when you started out buying?
Well, so I'm definitely very much an architect and a Virgo in my brain. And so I made a spreadsheet. I'm like, all right, so here's every yarn weight that I want to carry. Here's sort of some important features that they need to have. So I had like, lace, fingering, sporty K, worsted, bulky, super bulky, like all written out. And then like superwash, non-superwash types of fibers. And I sort of mapped out like which were like, what do I think are the core things that I need?
Okay.
And can I make it work with my budget? And so honestly, it's kind of funny to me now. I look at the old photos of the shop from when I opened in 2015 and I was like, there was hardly anything in there. I can't believe I made it,
Yeah. So was there a turning point down the road where you felt like, wow, I am going to make it? Like, you said you had a 3-month cushion. Was there something you could point to where you're like, wow, that was when I knew like this is going to work?
Well, so honestly, it was the pandemic, because I was, at the time I was still married. My husband had a good job. And so I needed the shop to not be losing money. There are people who are able to run the shop at a loss and it helps their taxes, etc. That's not my reality. I needed the shop to at least be self-sufficient. But then with the beginning of the pandemic, and actually right before the pandemic, my husband had lost his job, and I sort of realized like either I make this work or I'm going to go have to find another job. And the pandemic really kicked that into high gear. And so at the beginning of 2020, I actually had to revamp the entire business and change my approach. We've grown online a ton in the last couple of years because of it. And now I'm at a point where I'm by myself and it's working. It's not easy. It's definitely, hard work every single day. And, but I'm surviving. I'm making it work.
So were you set up for e-commerce prior to 2020?
I was, yes, but not to the extent that I am now. We always had a web shop, but I sort of only had like our most popular yarns on there. I didn't have everything. And we sold so little online that our physical inventory point of sales was separate from our web shop inventory point of sales. And so if you sold something physical, you had to manually go in and take it off the web shop. And that was fine because, we only sold like a few $100s worth of stuff online. It was fine. But then, I had to completely change that for 2020. And so I actually got rid of my old point of sale system and I completely rebuilt the back end of the store to have an integrated like in-person point of sales and online, and went through the store and put every single piece of inventory down to every last button on there over the last couple of years. It's been a whole lot, but it's been great. And
what system is that built on? Is that built on Shopify or something different?
Yes, it's on Shopify.
And you've been happy with the integration between in-person and online for the POS for Shopify?
Yes, yes. When I had started, I was using Lightspeed. Lightspeed is a very good in-person point of sale system, but I found that the website part of it was not great. And so I was actually using Lightspeed and Shopify together.
Ah,
Um, and then I got rid of Lightspeed and had to become acquainted with the in-person portion of Shopify.
but it's worked for you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So when everything did shut down for the pandemic, I know your shop closed. Did you kind of turn the store? Cause I know quite a few retailers did this like into almost like a shipping center or like warehouse sort of thing where you would just go in by yourself or maybe have
Yep.
someone else go in by themselves and just ship online orders.
Yeah, so because at that point I went into panic mode. I was like, well, I'm not giving up. I'm not going down. And so, yeah, I put curtains up so I could close the windows because I'd be in there working and people would keep like walking by and like peering in at me, and it was really creepy because the store was closed. So I put curtains, and then I set up my plastic folding tables and just made a shipping station. And I was like, all right, we're going to make this happen. And I was also offering free local deliveries for purchases over, I think it was $30. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I would be in the store during the day shipping orders, and then I would get in my car and I would drive for 2 to 3 hours doing deliveries all over the North Shore.
Wow. So what was that like?
That tapered
Wow.
off. That tapered off eventually, but
Yeah.
it was definitely not something I ever expected to be doing.
Right.
Running a yarn shop, right? Driving around for 2 to 3 hours delivering stuff. But it was really special in a way because it was at the beginning of the pandemic. It was the beginning of quarantine where we didn't really know anything, and so it was these brief opportunities for connection with people because like I'd wear my mask, I'd have my disinfectant spray, I'd run to their doorstep, drop the bag, ring the doorbell, run away, wait for my car and wave. And so there was that moment of like they'd see me and they'd recognize me, and so it was a way where people still felt a little bit of connection during a time when they weren't really seeing anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I'm so glad you survived through the pandemic and were able to kind of figure out how to make it work. And I know that, community, as you said, is really an important value for you and, is built into your name of your store. And it sounds like workshops are also something important. So I wondered, what kinds of workshops you offer and what works best when it comes to workshops, like which ones really fill and have high demand?
Well, so the interesting thing about workshops is that I think I approach them a little bit differently than other shops, and it's just based on how my brain works. Because I've seen a lot of shops do project-based classes where they're like, oh, we're going to knit this specific pattern together. And I don't know why, but I feel bad charging people to come knit a pattern with me. Like there's something where it's not clicking for my brain. And obviously it's a format that works because tons of people do it. My workshops really focus more again on the techniques. And so, I teach, workshops that focus on steeking, workshops that focus on, how to do proper finishing and seams, how to do short rows, how to do Portuguese knitting, brioche from basic to advanced, how to read charts. And so it's very much the technical aspects. And, now I travel to teach those workshops for Vogue Knitting in various places. I've been invited to teach them for other knitting guilds. So there's definitely a demand for it, but I always wonder a little bit. I'm like, why is the other format not quite clicking for my brain? And I feel like I'm missing something.
And I don't know anything about Portuguese knitting. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
So Portuguese knitting is a style of knitting where the yarn is tensioned around the back of your neck or with a knitting pin. And so all the knitting is done by flicking your left thumb.
Oh, wow.
So it's just it's a different way of tensioning the yarn.
Yeah. So does that work better for certain people? I'm just trying to think.
Yeah, so it can help people who have repetitive motion injuries from, throwing the yarn, which happens. It's really good for color work because it controls tension very evenly. And also, so if you're a person who struggles with like rowing out in your knitting, Portuguese knitting's good. It is good for color work. And it's just, for me, it's also fun because it's something that has to do with my ancestry, and I get to share a little bit of that way.
Yeah. And are you still dyeing yarn? Is that still part of your business?
So yes, sort of. I haven't stopped officially. I just haven't had much time for it, but I will again,
Okay. And
because my yarn is the local yarn. When people come and ask, like, "Oh, I want something dyed here in Salem," it's my yarn, but I can't dye enough to sort of keep it in stock because I'm very busy. So I'm figuring it out.
right. Yeah,
Um,
totally. And is that yarn line called Toil and Trouble?
yes.
I love all the like witch branding. It's
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it sounds like too, you opened, like a subscription box. And I wondered if you could tell us about that, both kind of what it is, but also what the sort of thinking was behind it.
Well, so it was October of 2020, and I was just, thinking like, what more can I do that's, going to be interesting, that's good for the business, but also beneficial to my community? And, how can I more deliberately bring together, witchiness and fiber arts? And so I just on a whim, I was like, I'm going to make these boxes for Halloween or Samhain, where I just have like a cohesive collection of, things that are made especially for this box because I wanted to work with, small makers and collaborate with some folks that way. But I wanted it to be themed for the holiday. And just have like that witchy vibe, but also be useful to knitters. And so I collaborate regularly with Rochelle from Homebrew Fiber Co., who makes really beautiful witchy, project bags, and Ash Alberg from Sunflower Knit, their designer, who is also a witch, create a lot of their practice into their work as well. And they make herbal products like teas and salves, as well as natural dyed yarn. And both of them are very dear friends of mine. And so I said, like, well, what if I gather my fiber witches? What can we create together that's special? And what I wanted to do is, share a little bit of the mindfulness practice that is part of witchcraft with people, but in a very accessible way. So each box is going to have, some hand-dyed yarn, especially made for the season. Well, actually, the first one was the only one that didn't have hand-dyed yarn, but it had a custom-made project bag and candles. And each one now, after that first one went really well, I was like, well, I'm going to keep doing this for other, holidays, solstices, equinoxes, and it's gone really well. And so now the format is that there's like some sort of exclusive hand-dyed yarn. I've dyed some of them. I've collaborated with other people for some of them, and then there will be knitting notions and accessories that are different each time, but they tie into the theme. Like for Litha of last year, which is one of the solstices, was all rose themed, so the yarn was inspired by roses. And then Rochelle, the Homebrew Fiber Co., designed a custom fabric with that motif and sewed it into bags. And then I had a needle runs through it, who is Maria Isabel, make custom needle gauges with the same motif. So everything is very, very cohesive. And I always include a little spell kit, that's some sort of meditation for helping with intention setting or mindfulness. And so it'll come with like a little write-up, and usually there's a crystal and a candle, but it's not always the same thing, but there's like a little spell component that goes with it.
And so I'm guessing that both the e-commerce ramp up, which we talked about earlier, and then this subscription box is allowing you to access more and more customers who aren't necessarily local to Salem.
Absolutely. I mean, so the first set of boxes that I did, I just made 12 boxes and they sold out very fast. And so I called up my friends and I said, hey, can you make some more stuff really quickly? And then we made a few more like really fast. And, people have really enjoyed them. And so now I'm doing them 4 or 5 times a year, and, always something different. And it's not a subscription in the sense that you have to be subscribed to get all of them. They come out regularly, and you can just, go and buy one before they sell out.
Okay. So it's not,
because It's
not like a
like
subscription, a membership. Okay. Cause I was going to say, like, I know that one of the reasons some people create a subscription box is to have that recurring revenue built into their business model. But that sounds like that's not what you were after.
Well, I mean, it's, they're not inexpensive, and I recognize that. And so I didn't want people to kind of have to make a choice of like, oh, I'm committed to spending this amount of money every time. But, thankfully, I have some very loyal followers who look out for every single box and then, rush to see which one gets to be the first one to buy one, which is really nice. But, it's something where people don't have to say, oh, do I really want to commit to spending $100 4 or 5 times a year?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to shift gears a little bit. You talked about how you teach technique-based classes and workshops in different places, including at Vogue Knitting. And I know that you serve on the Vogue Knitting Live Diversity Advisory Council. And so I wondered if you could talk about the goal of that group and the impact that it's been having since you've been involved with it.
So I was invited to join. When the DAC was established, there was a core group of members that then started inviting and voting on, more members. So I wasn't one of the very first ones, but I was ultimately part of the inaugural group. And the goal there was to help Vogue Knitting do everything they can to be a more inclusive and diverse, space and experience, and to really be proactive about creating standards for that in the industry. I think we all remember now that it's been, I think, almost 3 years at this point that the conversation started, right, about inclusivity and, racism in the knitting industry and what to do about it. And Vogue Knitting wanted to take a proactive stance and decided to create this diversity council to, review all of their current practices, but also to serve in an advisory capacity with the implementation of new programs and, just make sure that we're always coming up with new things. And so, one of the very first things that we did, because it was right before the pandemic, is we reviewed how they were running their big New York event and looked at ways that we could make it more inclusive and more accessible. And so for me, with my architecture background, for example, I looked at their market layout and I was like, you know what, let's improve this for wheelchair accessibility. Let's think about what it means to be someone with mobility issues going to an event like this. And so out of that discussion, they sort of reprogrammed the space, but they also created the quiet room for folks who have, issues with, sensory overload and need some time to decompress. I asked for the creation of that and it was really successful, but we also created early access for folks with disabilities who need more time and space to go through the market so that they could feel like they could go and be safe and enjoy and not just get, trampled over when the marketplace doors open. And so, there's sort of very concrete things in terms of like, event layout. But then we moved to virtual, right? And so we kind of had to think like, what does it mean in that space? And so we've been very deliberate about recruiting diverse teachers. We've created a diversity training that happens before every event for teachers and vendors and that we're constantly updating. But we've also created a program called Launchpad, which is a small business accelerator for LGBTQI and BIPOC and disabled, fiber professionals. And we've created, opportunities for more representation through panels. I partnered with Louis Boria, Brooklyn Boy-Knits. It was actually in New York in 2020 at that Vogue event where I said, you know what, we really need to do something to represent Latinos more in the fiber arts. And so we created our Latina Silana panel that runs now bi-monthly. And then we created the Prism panel to represent, queer fiber artists. Angela has created a panel for Asian fiber artists. And so Vogue has really given us as the DAC the opportunity to implement very specific things, which has been wonderful.
Yeah. And I love that you said it's sort of setting an example or a standard for the whole industry. So it sort of stretches out beyond just the single company.
Right, because, since that started, other companies in the fiber industry have started having their own, DEI practices and DEI hires and making sure that they have systems in place to improve their own practices. But really the goal here for Vogue was to make sure that we were being really proactive and not just reactive.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's great to hear a little bit about. And I do think it's something that other companies and organizations can create on their own as well, just to bring people together to review their current practices and think about what they're already doing and what they could be doing going forward in a more proactive way. Yeah, I think it's a really inspiring model. So could you tell us a little bit more about Latina Silana? I don't know much about that. And is that, you said it meets twice a month, or how does that work?
Every other month, every 2 months.
Oh, okay.
Vogue Knitting Live now has their virtual monthly retreats.
Right.
And so Latina Silana is a panel where that Louis Boria and I co-host, where we invite other Latino fiber artists to come talk to us and share their experiences. And so our goal is both to highlight other makers of Latinx backgrounds and, promote their work, but we also have conversations about, how does your identity inform, your creative process, but also what has your experience been like as a Latino in the fiber industry, and what has been good, what has not been good, what needs to be better. And so we get to simultaneously, highlight other small businesses, but also really bring to the forefront, discussions of diversity.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And that's part of Vogue Knitting's virtual event. So you can buy a ticket to that and be able to attend if people are interested. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's super. And I love that Vogue Knitting has continued to do these robust virtual events, even as the world has begun to open up and their live events are happening again.
Yes. And that's the thing, is that, they're also giving us the space to have these discussions at the in-person events. I flew out to Seattle in April to their first in-person event since the pandemic. And I went there to do a live discussion on diversity with Cecilia, who is also on the council, Creative Ceci on Instagram. And I will be at the New York show in August, teaching a bunch of workshops, but also, again, doing a panel on diversity.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's super. Okay, so I would love to get to your recommendations, if that's okay with you, because you've got some really good ones on this list that I'd love to share with listeners. So one of them is a new book. It's called Knit Strips. I've been looking at this book. I think it is so cool. And you got to contribute to it. So tell us about it. I did link to it in our newsletter a little while back because it's super cool.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so Knit Strips is the world's first comic book style, knitting book. And it was born out of the Modern Daily Knitting blog, where they were putting out some patterns that were illustrated in, comic book format. And then it turned into a book proposal. And the editors actually reached out to me to ask me to contribute a pattern. And, the book is super cool and full of techniques and different projects and bucket list items. But one of the things that I thought was really special is that they wanted the book to be very universal with the patterns in terms of being able to use any yarn and any gauge. So like the sock pattern that I designed, it's a formula so that you can make a sock with literally any gauge, as opposed to being like, you have to use, fingering weight yarn at this gauge, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that it's really built to, the entire book is really built to help empower knitters to really understand how things are coming together, which, is really important to me.
Yeah. And it's like they hired like a comic book artist to create the pages. So it really looks like a comic book. Like it's very cool.
Yeah. So the process of designing the pattern for it was very unique, because I didn't just have to write the pattern. I then had to create the sort of basic storyboard for how my comic would be set up to make sure that everything that I thought was important was illustrated. So mine was a combination of photos. But if you look at the pictures of how to do the wrap and turn, I actually did the original drawing. And then the comic book artist, obviously redid it in her style.
That's so cool. Yeah, very unique experience of contributing. I mean, many of us have contributed a pattern to a book, but this is a unique experience of contributing a pattern to a comic book.
Yeah.
So yeah, people should go check it out. I think it's super interesting. And you sell embroidery products as well, correct? At Circle of Stitches. And it sounds like you're working on one specifically that is a lunar moth.
Yeah, so yeah, I do sell, cross stitch kits and embroidery kits, and I have been partnering with a embroidery artist who goes by Rick Rack. Her name is Inga Ricky, and she designs these really beautiful, sort of witchy looking embroidery designs. And the amazing thing about them is that they look beautifully complex, but they're all made up of super simple stitches. So they're just very meditative and really nice. And of course, I love the witchy aesthetic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I love about embroidery too, is it does look complicated and intricate, but it is really made up of very doable and very easy stitches. And so I don't know, it is very meditative. Like there's not a lot of, you don't have to do a lot of thinking to master it. And you get great results. So that's great. And we will link to that specific one in the show notes. And then you also wanted to recommend knitting barber cords. I'm going to admit that I don't know anything about this. So what is that?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So the Knitting Barber, she's based somewhere in Europe. I wish I remembered more specifically, but she created these hollow silicone cords that will attach to the end of your needles. And I know that our listeners can't see, but I'm going to show you so at least you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So they are these silicone cords.
Yeah.
And they're very, very flexible and they're hollow. And so they are the perfect stitch holder because what you do is you grab your knitting needle and you just slip the silicone tube onto the tip, and then you can just slide your stitches like off your needle onto this very, very flexible silicone cord, right? So if you want to try on your garments, this makes it really easy. If you need to put something like sleeve stitches on a holder, it's really easy. Like you never have to thread a darning needle and pull it through the stitches ever again. And because it's like this is very, very flexible, you can tie a knot in it. It makes it very easy to try on your garments.
Wow, that's super cool. All right, I will definitely link to that. That's super neat. My daughter is an avid knitter, and that sounds like it would be a great gift. So
yeah, I actually, one of my customers, Tessa, recently wrote a blog post about these cords because it's one of those things where it's really hard to explain how cool they are until you use them. And, Tessa is a regular customer of mine, but she was like, Anna, these are kind of stupid. Like, what is this? And I was like, seriously, you need to trust me. And so she wrote an entire blog post on, how she was wrong and how awesome they are.
Yeah, they're one of those things that you need to see in person, or just try yourself. And then.
So I'll send you the link so that you too can know how wonderful they are.
Yeah, this is a good gift for a knitter in your life.
Yeah.
So, or for yourself if you're a knitter. So that's awesome.
And they come in a rainbow of colors.
Right. Yours are purple. They're very pretty. Yes. Yeah. Well, Anna, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. It was great talking to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Abby. Thank you for having me.
And you've been listening to the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today's episode was sponsored by Craftsy. Whether you're new to making or looking to advance skills in a favorite hobby, Craftsy is the place to learn. With over 1,500 classes, there's something for everyone, from knitting and sewing to baking and cooking, gardening, embroidery, quilting, and more. Visit CraftsyOffers.com today and get a full year of Craftsy Premium membership for just $3. That's 97% off the regular price. Start turning ideas into projects you can be proud of. Thank you so much, Craftsy. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals. When you become a member of Craft Industry Alliance, you get in-depth coverage of craft industry news, the opportunity to connect with fellow professionals for advice and support, and access to an educational library filled with ideas, tools, and resources to help you as you build your business. Join us at craftindustryalliance.org. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.